It's story time.
Hi, welcome to Storytime. I'm Kimberlyn. There's big shift, big changes happening. Not all of them are feeling like they're fully in my choice. And yet, that's just a perception. One of the things that I'm talking about and exploring, particularly this month, is participation, is citizenship. And in light of yesterday's declaration from President Biden for Indigenous Peoples Day, to kind of recognize, let's say, and accept responsibility for the miscommunication that perhaps has been created by celebrating Columbus Day. Not to undermine Italian Americans' influence, but rather to recognize that the victor's perspective is not the only truth in the story. So, story time, right? That's what this program is called. And we're in transition. I'm moving it off of Facebook, which feels like a big deal to me. And yet, why? It's not like Facebook is the only way to connect, but it really does speak directly to the story I want to share today, which is one of the things that is key to belonging, to the nature of belonging, is having access. And that's what Facebook offered Life's Work Yoga, offered me, is a way to make this special time, this conversation, more accessible to the general public. Why? Why did I want to be accessible? Because I believe that that's the first stage of inclusion, of belonging. The second stage is really the invitation. If we don't have access, then what really is the point of an invitation? But even if the invitation is extended, but inclusion is not offered, there will be no true belonging. And so in light of Indigenous Peoples Day, maybe the infraction for belonging really comes back to this idea of access. Did they have access to the power, to the decisions, to writing the story that negated their component, their contribution? Whereas as we get further down that sequence of events from access to invitation to inclusion, the personal suffering tends to be more intense as we get farther down that path. Why? Well, there could be any number of reasons. I think one of which is that access tends to be a more broader story, meaning an entire population or an entire community is denied access. That feels less personal, less targeted. But if I've been given access, if I've been extended an invitation as a group or as an individual, and then am denied the opportunity to be included, does that not feel more personal, more rejecting, more wounding? So there's always a story, right? One of the stories that came to mind in preparation for today was one that my daughter just shared with me yesterday at our snack table, afternoon snack at the house, coming home from school. And she shared with me last week how excited she was about being invited to participate in this extracurricular group. She felt hope in the sense that it was not a national, even though there is a national branch of this group, it was specifically school directed, so a narrow pool, so to speak, of rules and obligations. And she felt like she was personally invited into access to something that was kind of bigger than she wanted. And then she was further invited, as all of her classmates were, to campaign for one of the leadership positions. She identified a position that she thought would be a good fit, that she could be of service. She put her name in the hat to be the secretary, the note taker. And she recognized that this was both an honoring of her kind of more typical role that she plays of she was already taking notes. She was already capturing minutes for the conversation for this group. Now, what she shared with me yesterday was that to her disappointment, it really became a popularity contest. At no point was there a guiding energy, a guiding voice, in this case, perhaps a teacher, right? That tried to outline the skill set that might be beneficial for each of these roles. And instead, the voting took on a very, you're either in or you're out kind of feeling. In which case, my kid and her friends did not get the positions that they'd hoped for. At first, I was concerned that she might then just quit the whole program. But fortunately, she's got a little more courage than I did at her age. Willingness to recognize that although she was invited, she wasn't included in the power structure. And if you're not included in the power structure, does that mean that you withhold and check out? Or does that mean you continue to look for ways to show up, to contribute, and to maybe even force the issue? Well, I'm proud of what she's come away with, which was this idea that, no, I'm still going to contribute. I'm still going to show up. And in fact, I'm still going to take notes, because what I know is that the person that got the role that I wanted doesn't do a good job of taking notes. Now, again, I had a moment where I was like, is this where she's going to say, I told you so, kind of an ego trip? Or was she able to just recognize that this was a need that she was able to fulfill? And for the time being, I am happy to say, relieved and both proud to say that her motivation seems to still be driven by service and a need that she sees in this group to have that continuity of someone who is both willing and capable of taking good notes. Now I'm going to rewind a little bit, because similarly, I was very involved in school, lots and lots of organizations that I was actually the editor or the director or the whatever the title might be for that particular group. And that was a lot of my identity. But where I didn't fit in, where I didn't feel like I was included, was actually in the social sphere. I tease a lot about how I really established my identity by my intellect, by my ability to learn and to gather knowledge, to know the answer to the question, even if the question hasn't yet been proposed. Well, as a result of that pursuit of knowledge, I often quieted and stifled the emotional development and even my ability to hear a deeper truth, a deeper wisdom, because everything had to make sense from this intellectual brain. Now, it's still a work in progress, mind you, but I think I've come a long way in opening up the channel of conversation to access witness. But as a 17-year-old young adult in high school, I was given access to the in crowd by way of an individual whose name is Tara. And the invitation there actually came in the form, so access, she and I shared a class together, actually sitting side by side on, I think it might have been a science class, a laboratory class, that we were side by side. So I had direct access to a cool kid, an individual who represented a larger body of the popular kids. She invited me to borrow a sweater or a skirt, that's what it was, to borrow a skirt for an upcoming dance, because she thought it would go well with a new sweater that I had just saved up to buy. Didn't often get fashion, at least not from the popular stores when I was in high school, right? We were much more frugal than that. But this was a sweater that I had saved up my money from working to buy the sweater. And it was like $65. It was a big deal in my world. But given her suggestion that I borrow her skirt to go with this sweater to show up for this dance, felt like I was being invited into the cool group. Now, I did borrow her skirt. I did wear her skirt. I did go to the dance. And she and I even said hello, and she complimented the look that I had put together with her help. But it wasn't until after the dance, and even a couple weeks later, that word got back to me that there was less than kind things being said about me from the rest of the cool kid crowd. And the one that hurt the most was kind of this dismissal that came from another person who, in talking to my friend, Tara, dismissed me as who is this? Like I didn't exist in his world. And then when it came time where he actually put two and two together, he referred to me as that freckle-faced kid. Okay, it's true, but it didn't exactly feel very kind, particularly given that I was still kind of in the throes of being the only freckle-faced kid in a very Scandinavian community in Minnesota. My skin fair, my skin did not tan. I didn't go to Florida for the winter vacations like the cool kids did. So although I had access to Tara, and I still think that she and I had a friendship of sorts, it wasn't of intimacy to the depth of which we could go to express authenticity. And I was reading a book called Wonder Works by Angus Fletcher this week, and it's a new book, and he's actually a brilliant human being, but it's looking at the inventions that are embedded in literature. But what I liked most about Wonderworks and why it relates to this story is that he talks about how our connection of expressing our authentic selves is based on two things. First, a willingness to self-disclose. And then in that self-disclosure, there has to be a level of stretch or a level of wonder, meaning we expose something that isn't obviously available. And this is what had started between me and Tara. I expressed my excitement over this new sweater, which is a little bit of a risk. And bear with me, it's not a big risk, right? Because she had sweaters like this. She had the brand that I had just purchased one of, right? In which case, when she then countered that by seeing my desire to fit in and belong and have a little more of a glamour fashion, she offered something that I didn't have access to prior, which was her skirt. Now, where this falls short of moving from invitation to inclusion is that Tara didn't respond to my sharing with something of equal vulnerability. And I missed that in the sense that if I was vulnerable and she responded by fulfilling my need, did that not mean that we were now friends? Well, this is where we often end up being the charity case, the pity party, the recipient of generosity, but not really moving up into that inclusion of belonging. So I'm not saying that what Tara did was unkind or even wrong. What I'm saying was that we often misinterpret what is the context of that invitation and are hoping for something bigger, maybe something different than what is being offered based on our attachments, but also maybe even not available from the person that is offering. And so I really liked what Angus was outlining in the sense that this circular self-feeding energy of vulnerability and stretch or wonder, because we've all been in that relationship where someone just drones on about self-disclosure, self-disclosure, self-disclosure. That's not intimacy building. That's not an expression of love until it stretches one of us, or ideally both of us, to either find the connection, find the curiosity, find the compassion to recognize what is really happening here. What is the invitation in this moment? And is that an invitation I want to say yes to? In which case, how do I then move towards inclusion? By returning that invitation to the other so that there is an exchange of vulnerability, an exchange of awe and wonder, and a deepening of our connection in authenticity. So Time will tell whether or not my daughter's participation results in what she sees as authentic contribution of value. But regardless, in some ways, this story has affirmed to her that she's not in, and yet that doesn't mean she is unworthy. And that, I think, is the lesson that took me many, many, many more years to come to that conclusion, that if I didn't get the first seat in the clarinet in band, that somehow I wasn't worthy of sitting second chair. If I didn't get editor's position on the newspaper, why would I even bother writing a story? Consider what you are seeking when that invitation shows up, and consider whether or not it's consistent by accessing the dimensions of our wisdom, by uniting our brain, our heart, and our belly. This, my friends, this is the practice of living yoga. I hope this story helps. I hope it communicates that regardless of whether or not you have access, regardless of whether or not an invitation has been extended from an outside source, the real strength, the real power comes when we can recognize for ourselves the access, the invitation, the inclusion is about finding our own alignment and then offering that in service, not dependent on whether or not we have permission. So here's your invitation to connect, to share, to listen with your whole heart and mind, to find the opportunities, the openings to, take a risk and be vulnerable, take a risk and show compassion, take a risk and show up. I hope to hear more of your stories as we continue this conversation. Be well. Namaste.